Hello everyone, it's Sandra here, and I'm looking in on my Buy the Book bin that I started 6 months ago with just 125 worms. Last time we gave them a feeding of the fuchsia berries, plus I think I gave them my apple core from my lunch. And so let's take a look and see what's happening. I see some white mold happening here on the surface. That is nothing to be alarmed at. That actually shows that the bin is retaining moisture, which I'm kind of pleased about, because this bin, because it doesn't have a lot of worm power, has trouble holding its moisture because the castings are slower to accumulate. So let's just take a look under this mold. We'll go straight for this old feeding area. And it's very moist. I put that piece of newspaper, the lesser inoculated one on top, the more inoculated one closer to the food. So let's just take a look and see what these worms did. There they are, hanging out in, there's one of them anyway, hanging out in the newspaper. I can still see flowers. I did add some unfrozen, just flowers from my patio. Made it look very colorful feeding. This is a spent corn cob that is still attracting a little bit of worm interest. This now becomes more of a slow food, as this corn cob will take a few more weeks to completely deteriorate. So I'm going to turn over this feeding section. And let's just see what we can find. There's an avocado pit that's being totally gutted. So no sign of the fuchsia berries. You can tell, I hope, that this no longer looks like shredded cardboard. It's that, intermediary between shredded cardboard and castings. It's sort of a medium brown. It's very different from my other worm bins that I put leaves in, that the castings are much darker black. That's one difference that I'm noticing right away. And I think at one point I'm going to do a comparison of the worms in here that have only been raised on shredded cardboard and newspaper, and compare them with the worms that I have in maybe my leaf mold only worm bin, because I do believe the pigment in the worms is also somewhat determined by diet, and maybe it's more to do with like carbon sources. I've heard leaves make richer colored castings and also deeper pigmented worms. So we'll test that theory as well. That's my old feeding marker. Well, gosh, they've hidden that on me so many times, and there it was. All right, so this feeding area, even though I still see, obviously the corn cob, and it's still very moist, and there was mold on the surface, and mold is food. I don't see any evidence of the apple core. I don't see any evidence of those fuchsia berries. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a nice mixing of this worm bin, and then we're going to give these worms a feeding. So I'm going to put this carbon and the corn cob off to one side, and maybe that one old flower that I found, I may find more. I put quite a few of those fuchsia flowers in here, so I may find more of them as I'm doing this fluffing. I'm just breaking up any lumps that I see. Here's an avocado pit. Yeah, it's ready to open. There it goes. So the worms will now get into that. So I'm just breaking up the shredded cardboard. Sometimes shredded cardboard can form little clumps. It's not as bad as office paper, I've found. But, when you're fluffing a bin and you're going through, I like to break open any clumps. That also disperses the inoculated cardboard into the non-inoculated cardboard that might be in the center of a clump. and mixes the castings in with it too. And all of that will greatly accelerate the bin. So I know it's not necessary to fluff a bin. The worms are not going to starve of oxygen or anything down the bottom. But I do feel, you know, my goal is to get castings for my garden, as well as process household food waste and garden waste. So I want these bins to keep moving forward. I want them to keep producing. So fluffing is one way that I accomplish that. And this end of the bin that was away from the food, it has those old avocado shells. If you don't blend up your avocado shells in a food processor, expect them to hang around a while. The worms play in them, but I'm afraid you will be finding bits of avocado shell probably in your finished castings when you sift, if you sift. So I'm breaking open this avocado pit. There we go. And I'm just rolling over, making sure there are no more clumps. Here's an avocado shell with a pit in it. Let's see if this pit is ready to open. Yes, it is. There we go. And in this shell, just emptying out the worms that were playing in it. And although emptying out those avocado shells won't accelerate their decomposition, they go leathery, and I'm afraid they do stick around. And, you know, you could break them up with your fingers, I guess. All right, so here's these avocado shells. Let's put the feeding area. I've fluffed everything, so even though you can feed in zones, corner to corner to corner, when you fluff like I just did, you've kind of abolished the whole point of that, in my opinion, because the feeding zones, corner to corner to corner, is to make sure that all corners of the bedding get addressed and the moisture gets dispersed. I've just done that. I've just mixed it all up. So there's no real reason why I can't continue to feed in the center. And quite honestly, it makes it easier for me to remember. And so I'm going to do it again. So this bin is going to get a little bit more cardboard bedding today. So first I'm going to put down the bits that I want the worms to address first. So I'm going to put this old newspaper, the avocado shells, everything on the bottom of this feeding zone, as well as the corn cob. And by doing that, I'm hoping that the moist feeding that I'm going to put in will inoculate, or well, this is already inoculated. I'm hoping that it will speed these things on to completion. And because this is a by the book bin, I'm going to assume that you do not age your bedding ahead of time, which is a strategy that you can use in a accelerated worm bin, but I'm going to use non-inoculated bedding, just straight shredded cardboard, after I give this feeding. So here's the food that I freeze. This is blended food. So this represents a lot of vegetables. This probably represents, if you put it in, you know, just a standard mixing bowl, this probably represents 8 or 10 cups of vegetables. It's quite a bit. It's got quite a considerable weight to it. So I blended it up and I frozen it. And so what I do is when I blend it, you can see that I put some eggshell grit right on top of it. So there's no powder when I add it to my worm bins. The eggshell powder has been saturated with the moisture of the feeding, so I don't get those big dust clouds anymore. So because I started with only 125 worms in this bin, I'm just going to peel out a little bit of this food. This is just enough to get these worms interested in this area. Like I said, it's got a little bit of moisture in it, but my food doesn't contain a lot of fruit. Quite honestly, most of this food that I've just crumbled in there is probably avocado shell, maybe a few dry onion peels, maybe a few asparagus stems. Yeah, that looks like an asparagus stem that didn't quite pulse all the way. So that is the bulk of my food. So it's not a super sweet feeding, but you know, it's pumpkin season coming up. These worms will get pumpkins soon enough. And so then what I'm going to do, it's a conventional bin. I'm going to get a handful of dry shredded cardboard and just put it on top. Now I saw mold growing on the surface of this bin. I am not worried about the moisture in this bin anymore. I do believe the moisture is holding just fine. So between the moisture in the food, the moisture in the surrounding bedding, I think that addition of dry cardboard will be more than taken care of. And I put bubble wrap on top of this. I mark my feeding zone. So this bin is tucked away for the day, and we will check in on it next week. Okay, everyone, thanks very much for watching. Bye for now.